The real story is what happens after the show.
Boy.
Dave Meltzer wrote, one man was killed and another was seriously injured as they were breaking down after the show. Kevin Sinex, a crew member brought in from Orlando, was working on breaking down a metal backdrop and taking down the lights about 25 to 30 feet off the ground when the scaffolding collapsed and he was killed. Second worker from the Memphis area, Paul Martin, lost his thumb in the accident. He was standing on some kind of beam taking down the lights when the beam collapsed, said DeSoto County Coroner Jeff Pounders to the Memphis Commercial Appeal. The accident took place around 11:20 p.m., some 25 minutes or so after the pay-per-view ended. Almost everyone had left. There were maybe 5 wrestlers left, and they heard a large crash. When going to the scene, it looked terrible, with a lot of blood everywhere and people attempting to revive Sinex, who was 45, through both CPR and shocking, but it appeared there was no way he could be saved. He was rushed to the hospital, and they couldn't revive him. Dixie Carter had already left for the UK to do advance work on this week's tour, so she made no statement, but it left the crew extremely depressed going into television the next 2 days. Jeff, we've spent a lot of time on this show hooting and hollering and talking about nonsense and should this guy have won? Should that guy have won? And what order should we do this? And was that a right call? And why didn't they fix that gear? You almost never hear about someone losing their life at one of these shows. And even more tragically, it's someone we never got to meet. It's someone who helped make this show happen and make it possible. Those unsung heroes behind the scenes. And at one of the events, we lose a guy, man. This is unbelievably sad and tragic. You were there. Tell us what you remember about that day.
It was, Conrad, I'll never forget. And when I heard 11:20, I felt like it's a little bit, but maybe not, because the hotel that we were staying at it was real close, but I had just gotten back and we were going to meet downstairs to eat. And I'd walked in my room and I had opened my first beer and I got a text, come to the building now. And I'm just like, what? And Conrad, you just, okay, start, okay, let's go. Slick Johnson, I said, hey dude, meet me at the car. Okay. And then I said, let's go. And you just never can imagine kind of walking into that. And we were just there, and it was, it's the entrance and how 2 beams. And I won't kind of get into all that, but how he fell and it just, Conrad, you just really, I don't say live in a nightmare, but it's just like, what? And in that building, and look, the loadout had to start back up. It's just, and yeah, Conrad, it's and I've always had a respect or a soft spot or a sweet spot for production folks. Back in the day when I broke in, it was whoever pulls the ring, son, go try to have a wrestling show without a ring. The ring crew are equally as important as the main event, those kind of lessons. But the folks that hang our lights, make the audio work, make the sound work, make the screens work, the folks who might just be pulling cable, might just be the quote unquote, the smallest, the most insignificant, or however you want to kind of table that. It's all a crew, and talent that gets there, I'll say late and leaves early and does their match and won't even watch other matches. you put it in context to the guy who is there on the load end and sometimes up 18 hours or 24 hours or whatever, and they're on the load out. And one of those guys to lose their life. I mean, tragic is not the word, but just the feeling. But that's what I said when I knew this was the event when I started into research. The show just didn't hit on all cylinders, but this obviously it put everything in perspective. And I'll just say this, wrap it up. But the feeling we had as I'll call it a TNA family, production, wrestlers, staff, the folks in Orlando that didn't come up at Universal Studios, it was the family, one of the family. Those tapings, what a somber situation that was. And with the Owen situation, but you say, okay, the kind of the show must go on and you have to pay your respects and all that. But there was a real uneasiness, not so much that we didn't want to do the shows when we got to Orlando, but man, the reality of how quick and sudden pay-per-view's over, everybody's running 1,000 different things, and a mishap. Conrad, it was a day that I would like to forget, but I never will.
It's you don't hear about stories like this very often. Jeff, did you know him personally?
Not as well as I knew Keith Mitchell and all that, but sure. I mean, when you kind of talk about the crew, of course you knew the crew. Okay, and at this stage, we'd been in Orlando a couple of years, so there were certain folks that we use local, like we always do, but also the guys who knew the show. It's like, oh yeah, I know the show. It just sucked. It really sucked.